The events of this tale unfold during the reign of Qin Shi Huang, who ruled over the Celestial Empire from 221 to 210 years before the birth of Christ. This was a time when one man first united under his authority all the lands that stretched from the distant west to the boundless east, from the cold north to the warm south. Shortly after his death, this state, built through violence and cruelty, would collapse in the flames of peasant and slave uprisings. But for now, the world trembled before the might of the first emperor. In those terrible times, when the iron hand of a tyrant ruled over the Celestial Empire, somewhere in the distant southern provinces, among blooming gardens and crystal streams, lived a beautiful girl named Men Jiang. She had just turned 3 times 5 years old, the age when a maiden blossoms like a peach tree in spring. Her face truly resembled a ripe peach, tender, with a gentle blush on her cheeks and soft features that seemed sculpted by the most skilled artisan's hands, and her voice was wonderful, like the song of an oriole at dawn, melodious, pure, the kind that could move even a heart of stone. Men Jiang lived with her father, the respected merchant Men Jiang, in a large house with red tile roofs and white walls. The house was surrounded by a luxurious garden where bamboo and pines grew, where chrysanthemums and peonies bloomed, and in the center shimmered a small pond with golden carp. This was a place of peace and beauty, far from the anxieties and horrors that reigned in the empire's capital. Meanwhile, in the capital ruled the one whom subjects simply called Shi Huang, the first emperor. In all the Celestial Empire there was no land he did not possess, no city that did not pay him tribute. Even the distant nomadic herders who lived in the endless deserts at the edge of the world bowed before his majesty and sent gifts. If you enjoy this kind of content and want to hear more fascinating stories, make sure to subscribe and leave a like, but only if you're genuinely interested. Get ready for the story, and to those listening before bed, I already wish you sweet dreams. Of all the rulers who had been called sons of heaven since ancient times, Shi Huang was the mightiest. His empire stretched for thousands of li in all directions. In the west, he commanded the construction of the magnificent palace of Wufang, which was to be the embodiment of heavenly beauty on earth. Thousands of the finest craftsmen worked on its creation. Wood and stone carvers, artists who painted the walls with scenes from the lives of gods, jewelers who inlaid columns with precious stones. The palace rose tier upon tier to the very clouds, and its golden roofs shone so brightly they could be seen from a full day's journey away. In the east, the emperor ordered the draining of endless swamps that had stretched there since the time when the world was young. Hundreds of thousands of workers dug canals and built dikes, transforming putrid marshlands into fertile fields. Many died from disease and exhaustion, but the empire gained new lands for growing rice and wheat. But the greatest of all his projects was the Great Wall in the north, a defensive structure 10,000 li long and 10 zhang high. This wall was to protect civilized China forever from the raids of wild tribes living in the steppes and deserts, day and night. Millions of people labored on its construction, peasants driven from their fields, craftsmen torn from their workshops, scholars condemned for seditious thoughts, prisoners from conquered lands. The wall grew stone by stone, at the cost of incredible suffering. Workers labored from dawn to sunset, often without even warm clothing in the harsh winter conditions of the north. Many died right on the spot from exhaustion, and their bodies were walled up in the structure. It was said that every stone of the wall was watered with blood and moistened with tears. Shi Huang ruled with unwavering firmness, consulting with no one and trusting no one completely. He was convinced that only the absolute power of one intelligent ruler could bring order and prosperity to the world. All subjects bowed before him to the very ground. Many deceived and lied to gain his favor, but few dared to tell him the truth. And the truth was that his rule, though it brought unity and order, cost the Celestial Empire millions of lives. The emperor became increasingly arrogant and cruel. To the 9 traditional forms of execution, he added 3 new ones, and throughout all the cities of the empire rang the screams of those thrown into cauldrons of boiling oil torn apart by chariots, or cut in half with great swords. They executed not only those found guilty of crimes, but all their relatives to the fourth generation along 3 lines of kinship. Court poets and writers continued, as before, to compose laudatory odes about the most noble of emperors, about the great benefactor and caring father of all subjects. They wrote from old ingrained habit, though they well knew that these songs and verses no longer pleased the emperor. He neither demanded nor listened to them, and no longer rewarded those who created them. It seemed the aging tyrant had lost the ability to take joy in anything, except the feeling of his own boundless power. But there was one thing that troubled him more than anything else: thoughts of death. All that is born between heaven and earth is mortal, the ancient sage Lao Tzu had once said. But Shi Huang considered himself unique and incomparable, hoping that fate would make an exception for him. He could not accept the thought that his magnificent person might vanish, as all mortals do. Therefore, the emperor issued a very unusual decree. He forbade speaking about death. Countless officials watched over the execution of this order, just as zealously as they watched over tax collection. Even from ancient documents of past dynasty kings, written on bronze tablets or bamboo strips, scribes carefully scraped out or blacked out with ink the character for death. About a person who had died, it was forbidden to speak directly. Instead, they used euphemisms. He departed. He returned to his ancestors. He completed his earthly journey. All cemeteries in the empire were ordered, surrounded by high stone walls, so the emperor would not see graves when he passed by. And if there was no stone in a particular locality, they were allowed to use tree trunks or bamboo, but the walls had to be no lower than human height. However, the emperor was not satisfied with simply forbidding talk of death. He decided to find a remedy against it. Shi Huang summoned to himself the most learned men of the empire, philosophers, alchemists, doctors, and magicians, and ordered them to find Lingji, the legendary mushroom that grants immortality. He well remembered the ancient song, "I pluck Lingji in the eastern land, in the land of immortals, on the border of Penglai. Eat of this herb," they told me, "and you will live forever, never to die." Penglai was a mythical island in the eastern sea where, according to legends, the immortals lived, but the emperor believed this island truly existed, and that the mushroom of immortality could be found. The scholars traversed all the forests of the Celestial Empire, dug through all the mountains, turned over every stone, in search of the miraculous mushroom. They even traveled on distant journeys to neighboring countries, to Korea, Japan, the lands of the southern barbarians. Many died in these expeditions from disease, attacks by wild beasts, or storms at sea. Finally, one of the scholars was fortunate enough to find something resembling the mushroom described in legends. It was a marvelous red mushroom, like an imperial robe, but covered with white spots like stars. It grew in a deep cave at the peak of a sacred mountain, and finding it was truly difficult. Triumphantly, the scholar brought his discovery to the palace. The emperor was ecstatic finally. The secret of immortality was in his hands, but before tasting the mushroom himself, he ordered its effects tested on the one who had found it. The scholar had no choice but to submit to the emperor's will. He ate part of the mushroom and died in terrible agony within just a few hours. The mushroom turned out not to be Lingji, but an ordinary, though rare, toadstool. This time the emperor spared the other scholars. Indeed, they had not fulfilled his will, but at least they had done nothing that could harm him. Then someone told the emperor about righteous men who supposedly lived 200 and 300 years. These were people who had never done evil, never lied, never killed, never stolen, and thanks to this received from the gods the gift of longevity. Shi Huang again ordered scholars to spread throughout the Celestial Empire and find such righteous men to learn from them the secret of long life. After months of searching, they finally brought to the palace some old man who, according to rumors, had lived more than 100 years and had never done anything evil. The emperor eagerly awaited meeting this righteous man, but when the old man opened his mouth to speak, everyone saw with horror that he had no tongue. As it turned out later, His tongue had been cut out 30 years earlier for publicly condemning the emperor's cruelty and calling him a tyrant. Now, even if he truly knew the secret of longevity, he could not pass it on. In those times, there lived near Men Jiang's home a young noble youth named Qi Liang. He came from an ancient family of scholars and officials who had served the state honestly and faithfully for many generations. Qi Liang was tall and slender, with intelligent eyes and a kind smile. He loved to read old books, write poetry, and play the qin, a 7-stringed zither, considered the instrument of sages. Qi Liang dreamed of someday becoming an official and serving people, helping with just governance of the country. He studied Confucian classics, dynasty histories, and the art of calligraphy. Friends respected him for his kindness and honesty, while elders praised him for moderation and wisdom unusual for his age. But dark times had come for educated and thinking people. The emperor increasingly distrusted scholars and writers, suspecting them of secret opposition to his rule. And most importantly, the empire's grand projects required working hands, very many working hands. One gloomy autumn day, the Imperial Guard came to Qi Liang's house, a group of armed soldiers in black armor with red ribbons on their helmets. They brought an order to take the young man to work on the Great Wall's construction. This was not a request or invitation, it was an order not subject to discussion. Qi Liang, son of Qi Ren, proclaimed the senior guard, unrolling a bamboo tablet with characters. By order of the Son of Heaven, you are summoned to serve the Empire in building the Great Wall in the north. Prepare immediately. Qi Liang knew what this order meant. Few returned from wall construction. There, in the cold northern mountains, people died by thousands from unbearable labor, cold, and hunger. He looked at the soldiers, at their iron spears and swords, and understood that open resistance was impossible. "Give me some time to gather my things," he requested. "You have until sunset," replied the guard. "We'll wait by the gate." When the soldiers left, Qi Liang quickly gathered the most necessary items and decided to flee. He knew it was dangerous. Escape from imperial duty was punished by death, not only for the escapee himself, but for his entire family. But what could he do? To stay meant certain death building the wall. To flee offered at least some chance at life. Taking advantage of the soldiers' departure, Qi Liang quietly slipped from the house through the back gate and ran toward the only place where he could hide, the private garden of the wealthy merchant Meng Shan. This garden was famous for its beauty and seclusion. No stranger had yet entered it, except the master himself and his daughter. Climbing over the stone fence, Qi Liang found himself in a true paradise. Around grew old pines with curved trunks, camellia bushes with white flowers, bamboo that rustled quietly in the wind. The paths were paved with colored pebbles, and the air was filled with the fragrance of chrysanthemums and osmanthus. The young man hid behind a small artificial hill made of stones of various wonderful shapes. From there he could observe the garden but remain unnoticed himself. His heart beat so loudly it seemed the whole world could hear this pounding. And suddenly he saw her. Along a narrow path leading to the central pond walked a girl of such amazing beauty that Qi Liang momentarily forgot to breathe. She was like a heavenly fairy who had descended to earth in human form. Her long black hair was arranged in an intricate style and adorned with mother-of-pearl pins, while her silk dress of soft pink barely touched the ground as she walked. The girl was in no hurry, enjoying the beauty of her garden. She stopped by flowering bushes, inhaled their fragrance, smiled upon seeing a bright bird on a branch. Suddenly a large, colorful butterfly with wings that shimmered in all the colors of the rainbow landed on a flower at her feet. The girl watched the butterfly with fascination. Then she wanted to catch it, not to harm it, but simply to better examine this marvel of nature. She carefully pulled a thin silk handkerchief from her sleeve and tried to cover the butterfly with it. But the butterfly proved cleverer. It flew away at the last moment, while the handkerchief fell into the pond. The girl laughed. Her laughter rang like the chiming of silver bells. The butterfly circled around her head as if teasing, then flew away, disappearing among the bamboo thickets. The girl approached the pond's edge to retrieve her handkerchief. She leaned over the water and suddenly froze as if struck by lightning. "What do I see? What do I see?" she cried in a frightened voice. In the pond's clear water, she saw not only her own reflection but the face of an unknown man. Qi Liang had hidden behind stones near the pond, and the water reflected his image like a mirror. Qi Liang, at first, didn't know what to do. To flee was dangerous. The guard might still be searching for him nearby and catch him, but to remain here with an unknown girl was very awkward. What would she think of a man who had secretly entered her garden? Finally, he gathered his courage. If fate had already brought them together, it was better to do everything honestly. He emerged from behind the stones and bowed low to the beauty, as etiquette demanded. "Save me, I beg you. Save me," he began pleading, falling to his knees. "I am not a thief or criminal. The Imperial Guard pursues me, and I seek refuge." The girl was frightened at first, but then looked carefully at the young man. She saw his honest face, heard sincerity in his voice, and understood that he spoke the truth. "How did you get here?" she asked, trying to speak calmly. "And who are you?" "My name is Qi Liang," replied the youth, not raising his head. "I am the son of a noble family, but today the guard came to take me to build the Great Wall. I know this means death, so I fled and hid in your garden. Please, do not betray me." The girl, whom we know was called Men Jiang, looked at the young man and felt her heart filling with a previously unknown feeling. Qi Liang was very handsome, tall and slender, with intelligent eyes and noble features. Most importantly, she sensed something special in him: kindness, honesty, depth of soul, rarely encountered. In Men Jiang's heart was born love, sudden, unexpected, but so strong that she understood this was the person with whom she wanted to spend her entire life. "Don't be afraid," she said gently. "I won't betray you. On the contrary, I'll try to help you. Come to my father. He's a wise man and will find a way out of this situation." Men Jiang, the beauty's father, was a middle-aged man with a kind face and wise eyes. He had grown rich through trading silk and spices, but wealth had not corrupted him. Men Jiang remained a just and compassionate person, who was always ready to help those in trouble. When Men Jiang brought Qi Liang to him and told of his situation, the old merchant listened carefully to the young man. "Tell me about yourself, youth," he said. "Where are you from? Who are your parents? What is your education?" Qi Liang honestly told about his family, about the education he had received, about his dreams of serving people. Men Jiang tested his knowledge by asking several questions from Confucian classics and became convinced that before him was truly an educated and noble person. But most importantly, he saw how his daughter looked at the young man and understood that Men Jiang had fallen in love. And when the father observed Qi Liang's behavior, he noticed that the youth felt something more than gratitude toward the girl. Fate itself brought them to each other, thought wise Men Jiang. Who am I to oppose heaven's will? Listen, Qi Liang, he said after a long silence. Your position is indeed dangerous, but I can help you. Become my son-in-law, and no one will dare touch the son of such a respected merchant as I. Besides, I see that you please my daughter. Qi Liang raised his eyes and saw that Men Jiang was blushing, but not objecting to her father's words. The youth's heart filled with joy. He too felt deep affection for her, but had not dared hope it was mutual. Master Men Jiang, he said solemnly, I would be the happiest person in the Celestial Empire if you allowed me to become your son-in-law. I swear I will love and protect your daughter until the end of my days. Then the matter is decided, announced Men Jiang. Today we shall have the wedding. Within a few hours, the merchant's house was transformed into a festive palace. Servants hung red lanterns and paper flowers, prepared festive dishes, invited musicians. Men Jiang wore her most beautiful wedding dress red, embroidered with golden dragons and phoenixes, while her head was adorned with a crown of precious stones. Qi Liang also received festive attire, a long robe of dark blue with embroidery and a cap with jade decoration. When he appeared before the wedding party in this garb, all the guests gasped in admiration. He looked like a true prince. The wedding ceremony was simple but solemn. The young couple bowed to their ancestors, then to each other, then to the bride's father. They drank wine from one cup, exchanged rings, and received blessings. "May your love be strong as mountains," said Ming Shen, blessing the young couple. "May it last longer than rivers flow. May you have sons and daughters, and may your home always be filled with joy and prosperity." Guests raised toasts, musicians played merry melodies, and the young couple looked at each other with such love that everyone around felt the warmth of their happiness. But their happiness was short-lived. When the sun began to set beyond the horizon and the wedding feast was in full swing, soldiers' boots thundered at the house gate. The Imperial Guard had found the fugitive. The soldiers burst into the house, ignoring protests from the host and guests. Their commander, a stern man with a scar across his entire face, approached directly to the newlyweds' table. "Qi Liang, son of Qi Ren," he roared. "By order of the Son of Heaven, you are arrested for evading imperial duty. Follow us immediately." "But he just got married," cried Meng Shan. "Give him at least one night with his young wife." "Imperial orders know no exceptions," the commander replied coldly. "Whoever interferes with the execution of the Emperor's will is himself subject to punishment." Qi Liang rose from his place. He knew resistance was futile and would only bring trouble to his new family. He approached Men Jiang, who sat pale as chalk, unable to believe what was happening. "My dear wife," he whispered, taking her hands in his, "I must go. But remember, I will always love you. Wait for me. I will surely return." Men Jiang could not utter a word. Tears rolled down her cheeks, and her throat constricted so tightly she could not breathe. The soldier seized Qi Liang by the arms and dragged him toward the exit. At the door he turned and looked one last time at his beloved. Then the doors closed, and he vanished into the darkness. Sorrow enveloped the entire family. Guests departed silently. Musicians put away their instruments. Red lanterns went out. Men Jiang locked herself in her bedroom and sang a sad song she would continue singing for many months. "Cold wind has burst into my home. The wine cup has turned to ice. Pillow and mat are cold as snow, and everything seems like a dream to me. Where are you, my beloved? Where are you, my dear? Are you still alive? Or have you already taken wing? On the great wall the cold wind blows, and my heart freezes with sorrow." Thus ended the happiest and saddest day in Men Jiang's life. Time passed unhurriedly, like water in a calm river. People aged, and wrinkles covered their faces like spider webs. Leaves on trees yellowed and fell, then grew green again. Thus seasons, years, decades passed, and even the great and mighty Emperor Qin Shi Huang was powerless before inexorable time. The skin on his face wrinkled like the peel of a baked apple that had lain long in the sunday. The slits of his eyes became even narrower, and his gaze more suspicious and cruel. Once black hair turned white and thinned. His back began to hunch, and his hands to tremble. The aging emperor almost never left his main palace of Wufang and visited less and less frequently the pavilion where lived Wu Yi, the youngest and most charming among his 1,000 wives and concubines. Wu Yi was only 17. Her beauty resembled morning dew on rose petals. But even she could not cheer the gloomy ruler. As before, the Son of Heaven ruled alone, consulting with no one and trusting no one completely. All courtiers bowed before him to the very ground. Many deceived and lied to gain his favor and avoid punishment. Intrigues wove around the throne, but the emperor saw through them and punished traitors mercilessly. Over the years he became increasingly arrogant and cruel. The deaths and sufferings of subjects no longer moved him. He looked upon people as ants whose lives had no value compared to the empire's greatness. To the 9 traditional forms of execution, he added 3 new ones, devising the most refined ways to torture the condemned. Throughout the cities of the Celestial Empire rang the screams of those thrown into cauldrons of boiling oil, torn apart by 5 chariots, cut in half with great 2-handed swords. Others were buried alive up to their necks and left to die in the sun, quartered by horses, forced to swallow molten metal. They executed not only the criminals themselves, but all their relatives to the 4th generation along 3 lines of kinship: parents, children, brothers, sisters, uncles, aunts, and even distant cousins. Court poets and writers continued, as always, to compose laudatory odes about the most noble of emperors, about the great benefactor and caring father of all subjects. They wrote from old ingrained habit. Though they well knew these songs and verses no longer pleased the emperor, he neither demanded nor listened to them and no longer rewarded those who wrote them. It seemed the aging tyrant had lost the ability to take joy in anything except the feeling of his own infinite power. But there was one thing that troubled him more than anything: thoughts of death. All that is born between heaven and earth is mortal, the ancient sage Lao Tzu had once said. But Shi Huang considered himself unique and incomparable, hoping fate would make an exception for him. He could not reconcile himself to the thought that his magnificent person might disappear, as all mortals do. Therefore the emperor issued a very unusual decree. He forbade speaking of death. Countless officials watched over this order's execution just as zealously as they watched over tax collection, even from ancient documents of former dynasty kings. Written on bronze tablets or bamboo strips, scribes carefully scraped out or blacked out with ink the character death about a person who had died. It was forbidden to speak directly. Instead, they used euphemisms. He departed. He returned to his ancestors. He completed his earthly path. All cemeteries in the empire were ordered surrounded by high stone walls, so the emperor would not see graves when passing by. And if there was no stone in a particular locality, they were allowed to use tree trunks or bamboo, but the walls had to be no lower than human height. However, the emperor was not satisfied with simply forbidding talk of death. He decided to find a means against it. Shi Huang summoned to himself the empire's most learned men, philosophers, alchemists, doctors, and magicians, and ordered them to find Lingji, the legendary mushroom that grants immortality. He well remembered the ancient song, "I pluck Lingji in the eastern land, in the land of immortals, on Penglai's border. Eat of this herb," they told me, "and you will live forever, never to die." Penglai was a mythical island in the eastern sea where, according to legends, the immortals lived. But the emperor believed this island truly existed, and that the mushroom of immortality could be found. The scholars traversed all the forests of the Celestial Empire, dug through all the mountains, turned over every stone searching for the miraculous mushroom. They even traveled on distant journeys to neighboring lands, to Korea, Japan, the countries of southern barbarians. Many died in these expeditions from diseases, attacks by wild beasts, or storms at sea. Finally, one scholar was fortunate to find something resembling the mushroom described in legends. It was a marvelous mushroom, red as an imperial robe but covered with white spots like stars. It grew in a deep cave at the summit of a sacred mountain, and finding it was truly difficult. Triumphantly, the scholar brought his discovery to the palace. The emperor was ecstatic. Finally, the secret of immortality was in his hands. But before tasting the mushroom himself, he ordered its effects tested on the one who had found it. The scholar had no choice but to submit to the emperor's will. He ate part of the mushroom and died in terrible agony within just a few hours. The mushroom proved to be not Linger, but an ordinary, though rare, toadstool. This time the emperor spared the other scholars indeed. They had not fulfilled his will, but at least had done nothing that could harm him or shorten his life. Then someone told the emperor about righteous men who supposedly lived 200 and 300 years. These were people who had never done evil, never lied, never killed, never stolen, and thanks to this received from the gods the gift of longevity. Shi Huang again ordered scholars to spread throughout the Celestial Empire and find such righteous men to learn from them the secret of long life. After months of searching, they finally brought to the palace some old man who, according to rumors, had lived more than 100 years and had never done anything evil. The emperor eagerly awaited meeting this righteous man, but when the old man opened his mouth to speak, everyone saw with horror that he had no tongue. As it turned out later, his tongue had been cut out 30 years earlier for publicly condemning the emperor's cruelty and calling him a tyrant. Now, even if he truly knew the secret of longevity, he could not pass it on. This incident finally convinced the emperor that scholars were his greatest enemies. They prided themselves on their wisdom, probably with the secret purpose of proving their superiority over the all-knowing monarch. They constantly praised antiquity, for no other reason than to belittle the present. They spread rumors and superstitions, daring to discuss imperial decrees, and now they had brought to the palace a man who, even knowing the secret of longevity, could not pass it on. This might have been done deliberately to mock the emperor. Shi Huang summoned his chief advisor, the cunning and unscrupulous official named Li Si, and asked for his help and advice. The emperor was not lacking in wisdom and could have dealt with the scholars himself, but he followed a simple rule. In case of success, the ruler gets the glory, while for mistakes, officials are responsible. Li Si was an educated man but devoid of conscience. He perfectly understood what the emperor expected of him and proposed a plan that exceeded even the boldest expectations of the tyrant. "Magnificent son of heaven," he said, prostrating himself on the floor. "Indeed, scholars are the source of unrest in the state. They live in the past and do not understand the greatness of the present. They compare your rule with the rule of ancient kings and always find reasons for criticism. Therefore, I dare propose several measures to restore order." "Speak," ordered the emperor. "First, all books in the empire must be burned, except those concerning medicine, divination, and agriculture. Let people study only what is needed for the state's practical benefit. Second, all who discuss the content of forbidden books, or quote them from memory, must be publicly executed in city squares. Third, all who, referring to earlier times, criticize the present, and condemn your wise reforms must be executed along with their entire clan. Fourth, all who within 30 days of the decree's proclamation do not present their books for burning must be exiled to work on the Great Wall." The emperor listened to these proposals with obvious satisfaction. This plan suited him completely. It allowed eliminating all inconvenient thinkers and critics with one blow. The decree was composed that very day and spread throughout the empire in the 34th year of Shi Huang's reign. In all cities and villages, imperial heralds proclaimed, "By order of the Son of Heaven, all books, except those concerning medicine, divination, agriculture, and other practical arts must be surrendered for burning within 30 days. Whoever fails to execute this order will be exiled to build the Great Wall. Whoever discusses forbidden books or quotes them will be executed in the city square. Whoever compares past with present to the advantage of the past will be executed, along with his entire clan." Throughout the Celestial Empire, fires blazed, Confucian classics burned, historical chronicles, philosophical treatises, poetry collections, thousands of years of Chinese culture turned to ash and smoke. People wept watching this barbarism but dared not protest. The punishment was too severe. Some scholars tried to hide books, burying them in the ground or hiding them in caves, but informers were everywhere, and most such attempts ended in arrest and execution. The official Li Si received generous rewards for his wise advice and was promoted to the rank of first counselor of the empire. But the emperor did not stop there, wisely reasoning that destroying books was only half the task, since human memory could preserve what was written on paper. He ordered Li Si to gather all who wrote books and bury them alive from those who were in the earth. He explained his logic. The decree was composed by Li Si and executed in the 35th year of the emperor's reign. Throughout the empire began a hunt for writers, poets, historians, philosophers. They were arrested right in their homes, dragged to squares, and buried alive in the ground. They say about 460 learned men were buried. They screamed and begged for mercy, but the emperor was implacable. He personally observed one of these executions and remained completely satisfied. However, within a year, the situation changed dramatically. Li Si's actions caused such outrage among the people that uprisings began throughout the empire. People who had until then silently endured cruelty could not bear the destruction of their culture and traditions. The emperor realized a scapegoat was needed. That same year, he ordered Li Si himself torn apart by chariots, accusing him of excess in executing the imperial will and provoking popular anger. Those who condemned Li Si's actions were so numerous, they could not all be exiled to build the Great Wall without causing irreparable damage to the state's economy. Therefore, the emperor pardoned most of them, but lost control over the situation in the country completely. The emperor aged with each passing day. His nose became sunken like a corpse's. His voice became hoarse like a jackal's whimpering. His hands trembled so violently he could not hold a teacup, and his back bent as if under the weight of an invisible burden. Around the palace, people were already quietly talking about his approaching death and dreaming of how they might seize the throne after his demise. Princes wove intrigues. Generals strengthened military loyalty. Officials sought allies. Everyone was preparing for the great struggle for power. At this critical moment, a scholar named Lu Sheng came to the palace. He remained alive only because during the mass persecution of scholars, he had been on a distant journey beyond the Celestial Empire's borders, seeking righteous men and the mushroom of immortality. When he returned to the capital, the slaughter had already ended and Li Si had been executed. Lu Sheng was a very clever and cunning man. He quickly understood the situation and decided to use it for his own benefit. The emperor sought immortality. Well, he would give him immortality, but in his own way. He was admitted before the emperor's eyes, and kissing with apparent humility the foot graciously extended to him, he spoke, "O divine ruler, I am your faithful servant, Lu Sheng. For many years I have searched for you for the mushroom of longevity and righteous men who know the secret of eternal life. I have traversed almost the entire earth and returned filled with wisdom." The emperor listened attentively, hoping finally to hear what he so craved. "On earth, there is not, and never was, another righteous man except you," continued the cunning Lu Sheng. "And there is no one wiser than you, for you were the first to discover the great truth. It is easier to deprive another of life than to prolong life for oneself. Your wisdom surpasses the wisdom of all previous rulers." These words greatly pleased the emperor. Finally, someone had appreciated his true greatness. "Since you have left me alive," Lu Sheng continued, "I will reveal to you the secret of true immortality. A righteous man does not get wet in water, does not burn in fire, soars in clouds and mist. He is invisible and all-knowing, like a deity. Here is the secret. Let no official know in which palace you live. Let no servant enter the room where you sleep, and let no one see how you eat. Become invisible to your subjects and behold your immortality, for that which cannot be seen cannot die either." The emperor rarely trusted anyone, but Lu Sheng's words seemed somehow familiar to him. He himself knew. The less subjects see their ruler, the greater majesty he possesses in their eyes. If they did not see him at all, they would revere him as a god. "Wise," exclaimed the emperor. "You have truly revealed to me the path to immortality." That very day, the emperor vanished from his subjects' sight, issuing a decree for the execution of anyone who revealed his whereabouts, or even spoke about where he might be. The most terrible years in the empire's history began, years of rule by an invisible tyrant. Terror gripped the officials. No one knew where the emperor was at any given moment. He could be in any of the 100 palaces scattered throughout the country. He could be standing nearby, disguised as an ordinary official. listening to conversations. He could observe every step of his subjects while remaining invisible himself. They said the emperor traveled incognito throughout the country in an ordinary chariot, checking how his orders were executed. No one knew when his doom might come for the slightest transgression or careless word. Never before in the Celestial Empire had imperial laws and decrees been executed so meticulously. Officials trembled with fear and dared not violate even the smallest instruction. Warriors never removed their armor and did not relax their vigilance for a moment. Merchants delivered supplies exactly on time and in full volume. Never before had neighboring peoples trembled so much before the power of the Celestial Empire's emperor. An invisible ruler seemed even more terrifying than an ordinary tyrant. One can fight against someone who can be seen, but how does one fight a shadow? And though no one threatened the empire's borders anymore, the Great Wall grew with unprecedented speed. Millions of people labored on its construction, dying from cold, hunger, and exhaustion. But now no one dared even whisper complaints about the cruelty. Since the emperor became invisible, preparations were in full swing for his future transition to another world, though officially no one dared even think about such a possibility. Kings and rulers of the Celestial Empire had traditionally been accompanied on their final journey by their wives, servants, and warriors who were killed or buried alive with the deceased. But this seemed too little for Qin Shi Huang. He decided to take with him an entire army and all the empire's officials. However, so the state would not be left completely defenseless and ungoverned after his death, it was decided to manufacture tens of thousands of clay figures of infantry, cavalry, and charioteers with horses and carts in natural size. This burial army, armed with real swords, spears, and bows, was to guard on the earth's surface the entrance to the enormous tomb being built deep within a mountain. Potters carefully molded and fired in kilns also figures of officials, of all ranks in their characteristic clothing and with symbols of power. All this was done with particular care also, because military men and officials, engaged in creating their clay doubles, understood. This way, they were saving their own lives. As long as the emperor was satisfied with an army of terracotta warriors, he would not demand real sacrifices. The exact location of the emperor's burial residence remained secret to most. Barbarian prisoners and slaves who participated in the tomb's construction disappeared without trace after completing work. This was considered evidence that the emperor, remaining invisible, personally supervised the execution of his grandiose design. One autumn day in the palace of Shachu, which stood on the bank of a great river, a strange suffocating smell appeared. At first they paid no special attention to it. The palace was large, and various odors always came from everywhere. From kitchens where food was prepared, from stables where horses were kept, from workshops where various things were made for the imperial court. But this smell was special. It resembled the stench of rotten fish, only much stronger and more disgusting. With each hour it became more intense, and soon the entire palace reeked with this unbearable stench. Servants and officials began whispering among themselves, trying to understand where such a smell could come from. Some supposed that supplies had spoiled somewhere. Others thought some animal had died and its body was rotting in some inaccessible place. When the smell became completely unbearable, one of the palace officials named Jin Wu suggested that in the emperor's bedroom there might be a cart of spoiled salted fish. Perhaps one of the servants had mistakenly brought it there and forgotten it. This version seemed quite reasonable to everyone. After all, no one knew where exactly the emperor was at the moment, and the bedroom in Shachu Palace had been empty for a long time. It was quite possible that a cart of fish could indeed have ended up there, but to voice such a supposition aloud was extremely dangerous. Jian Wu was immediately sent to the court executioner to determine the source of rumors that dishonored the emperor. For everyone knew the emperor never ate salted fish, considering it food for commoners. Under cruel torture, the unfortunate Jin Wu, trying to stop his torment, began giving testimony against everyone who came to mind. He claimed that half the courtiers also smelled this stench and spoke about it. One by one they arrested and tortured new witnesses, and each of them in turn tried to save himself by accusing others. Finally, the senior eunuch Zhao Gao, who actually managed the palace in the emperor's absence, realized the situation was getting out of control. If this continued, soon they would have to arrest half the court. After long hesitation, it was decided to break the prohibition and open the doors of the emperor's bedroom. Several of the bravest servants, covering their noses with wet cloths, carefully entered the room. No salted fish was found in the bedroom. Instead, there, on an enormous bed of ebony wood, under silk coverlets, lay the corpse of the ruler of the Celestial Empire himself. His face had blackened, his body swollen, and dark fluid flowed from his mouth. It was clear the emperor had been dead for several days. The greatness of the Celestial Empire ended with death on a lonely bed, in an empty room where no one could hear him or help him. He who wanted to become immortal died, as all people die quietly, alone, and irreversibly. Meanwhile, thousands of li from imperial palaces, in a small house in the southern provinces, Men Jiang continued waiting for her husband. Years had passed since soldiers took Qi Liang on their wedding day, but she did not lose hope. Every day she sat by the window facing north and looked toward where, somewhere beyond mountains and forest, the Great Wall was being built. She imagined her beloved among thousands of other workers, imagined how he carried stones, built the wall, froze under the cold northern winds. Men Jiang learned to sew warm clothing. She wove the thickest and warmest material she could make, and sewed for her husband a winter jacket, pants, warm boots, and a fur hat. All this she decorated with embroidery, putting into each stitch her love and longing. Long winter evenings she spent singing sad songs about separation. Without you, I am like a lute with broken strings, like a kite on a severed thread, like a wheel without spokes, like a pitcher without bottom. When will you return to me, beloved? And when spring came in the second year after her husband's departure, Men Jiang could wait no longer. She gathered the warm clothing she had prepared for Qi Liang, took some food for the journey, and said to her father, "Father, I am going to search for my husband. Perhaps he is sick or wounded and needs help. I cannot sit at home any longer, just waiting." Old Meng Shan tried to dissuade his daughter. "The road to the Great Wall is long and dangerous. There are wild beasts, bandits, mountains, and forests. How will you, a young woman, reach there alive?" But Men Jiang was unwavering. "Love will overcome all obstacles. If I must die, then I want to die searching for my husband, not waiting for him at home." And she set out on her journey. The journey was indeed difficult. Men Jiang walked along roads washed out by rain, spent nights under the open sky, lived on berries and roots. Often she walked, singing her sad song. "How cold I am, how hard it is for me. My husband is in the north, where wind is cruel as a beast, without warm clothing. How is he there now? Is he still alive? Or has he already taken wing?" Strangely, it seemed nature itself helped her on the journey. Men Jiang's love was so strong and pure that even wild animals sensed it and did not touch the woman. When chasms opened before her, they seemed to become less deep. When the road was lost in forest, birds showed her the right direction. Thus, step by step, day by day, month by month, Men Jiang approached her goal. And finally, before her rose the Great Wall. It was even larger and more terrible than Men Jiang had imagined. The wall rose to the very clouds and stretched from horizon to horizon, having neither beginning nor end. It seemed it could encircle the entire world. Under the wall, like shadows, thousands of people moved with shovels and picks, with baskets of stone on their backs. The cold northern wind knocked them off their feet, and beside each group of workers stood guards with whips that whistled ceaselessly through the air. Men Jiang approached one of the guards, a fat man with a cruel face and small, evil eyes. She said politely, "My husband's name is Qi Liang. I brought him warm clothing. Could you tell me where he works?" The guard first looked at her with surprise. Rarely did relatives make it this far. Then his face was distorted by a cruel smile. "Qi Liang?" he asked. "Ah, that young fool who was always crying for his little wife. You're too late, beauty." And he pointed to long rows of white bones lying under the wall. "There's your husband. Already half a year since he joined his ancestors. His bones are somewhere among these. Only don't ask me which ones exactly, who can tell them apart." Men Jiang looked at the white bones, all that remained of thousands of people who had died building the wall, and understood the terrible truth. Her beloved was dead, died from exhaustion, cold, and grief. Never seeing her again, she fell to her knees, right on the frozen ground, and wept as only a woman who has lost the most precious thing in life can weep. Her crying was so bitter and sincere that it seemed all the world's sorrow was concentrated in it. She cried for her husband, for their unrealized happiness, for all those thousands of people whose bones stretched in a white line along the wall's foot. And suddenly a miracle happened. That very moment wind arose, not ordinary wind, but something much stronger. Like a hurricane, the sky darkened, and black fog enveloped the wall. The earth began to tremble, and a rumble sounded in the air like the groaning of mountains themselves. And the wall began to fall. First one small section crumbled, then another. Enormous stones rolled down with the thunder of drums. Guards and workers scattered, screaming in terror. But Men Jiang continued crying, paying no attention to the chaos around her. Her tears had such power that even this symbol of imperial might could not withstand them, for the wall was built on the bones of innocent people, on the grief of mothers and wives, on the tears of children who had lost their fathers. And when this sorrow concentrated in the weeping of one woman, it became stronger than stone and mortar. The great wall crumbled for kilometers around, turning into piles of rubble. And finally, when the storm subsided and the fog cleared, Men Jiang saw before her what she had sought so long. Among the white bones lay also the bones of her beloved Qi Liang. She recognized them not with her mind, but with her heart. By that power of love that can do what is impossible for ordinary people, Men Jiang gathered her husband's bones and buried them properly, with all honors and rituals. She spent 7 days and 7 nights by his grave, singing to him the songs she once sang in the happy times of their brief marriage. And then she left that place, and no one ever saw her again. They say she transformed into a bird and flew to distant lands where winter never comes and where lovers can be together forever. Thus ends this story, a story of a tyrant's greatness and fall, of faithful love, and of how human feelings are stronger than the mightiest walls. Emperor Qin Shi Huang died, and soon after his death the great empire collapsed in the flames of uprisings. His tomb with its army of terracotta warriors still stands, reminding us of the vanity of human pride. And from the Great Wall, only pitiful fragments remain in the place where Men Jiang wept. But her love and her sorrow live on in songs that have been sung for more than 2,000 years. And everyone who hears this story understands a great truth. Real strength lies not in armies and palaces, not in walls and fortresses. Real strength lies in human love, capable of moving mountains and destroying empires. Men Jiang's love conquered the emperor's cruelty. Her tears proved stronger than the Great Wall, and memory of her will live as long as people remember what true love means. Therefore, even now, when someone in China cries from grief, they say, crying like Men Jiang. And when someone shows unbreakable loyalty, they say, faithful as Men Jiang to her Qi Liang. Thus, past dynasties and emperors, palaces and walls crumble, but memory of true love remains forever.